Well, welcome to this short lecture on capital budget nuances. I subtitled it Three Decades of Buying Big Stuff. You know, as a facilities professional, you will have the opportunity to be involved in the type of purchases that we rarely experience in our personal lives. Small items of a few thousands of dollars you will buy on a regular basis, and large ticket items of hundreds of thousands of dollars and possibly even millions of dollars, you'll be involved in those conversations. And this really is one of the things that distinguishes, I guess, the job from a lot of other positions. Very few people in the organization will be so integrated into these large dollar conversations than the majority of people that work in healthcare facilities. And it is a true honor, but it's also a major responsibility. And over the years, I took that responsibility very seriously. It's something that you're involved in it so much on a monthly, maybe weekly, and if even possibly daily basis, that you can lose sight of all the things that you'll learn along the way. It's also one of the reasons why we've spent a fair bit of time and continue to spend time in different courses on trying to understand, money, understand, the value of money, try to gain competencies on speaking the language of the people who manage money, the financial departments. Because if we can communicate with them and we can understand and help speak their language, it will certainly make you much more valued in the organization. But this presentation is really wanted to talk to you just about a few things that I experienced and I wanted to pass along to you. Some of you who've worked in the industry for a while understand what I'm talking about and have experienced these same things and more. Some of these who have never done this before, much of this will be maybe unique and new to you. One of the biggest things when you come into a facility is you have a lot of items that are worth a lot of money. When you take air handlers and generators and switches and other assets that are on your inventory, it is a pretty big list. And something that you really need to think to do when you're working in any hospital and you're managing all those assets, you need to have a multi-year plan. You really need to sit there and say 3 to 5 years. Look at all the stuff you have and what is inside of that 3 to 5 year window of needing replacement. And you have to update that every year. And you'll add things on that list that you'll just realize you never considered previously. And you really need to start to thinking when you're putting things on the list in terms of when does it need to be replaced. You got to start using more sophisticated methods of replacing things beyond just age. I think a lot of people have useful life. That's kind of a common way to look at when should something be replaced. For example, different roofing materials will age at a fairly standard rate, and so you could say the useful life of a certain type roof, maybe a multi-layer bitumen roof is going to be 25 years. You might say that another type of roof might be 30 years or 15 years. And you might say, and you might put that in out there, like that. However, we also do recognize, based upon seasons and where you live and sun and rain and ice and everything else, that can be quite varied. So it may be plus or minus 5 years based upon your conditions and other things. So you need to really start looking at things from more than just a useful life perspective. You need to develop sort of a risk assessment, if you will, for capital items, and then make the determination from there, should it be replaced, within 5 years, or maybe it's 10 years. Sometimes when you do those risk assessments, you also want to know, can you replace this thing to failure? There are some items, no doubt, that if you wait for them to fail, it is going to cost you quite a bit more money to replace it urgently than if you planned the replacement. In some cases, the actual price of the capital item, you could lose all of that and more, the value of that and more, just because you had to replace it urgently, whether it's for shipping and whether it's for mobilization, all these reasons why it could cost you a lot of money to put something in under urgency. And that's another thing to, put inside that risk assessment. Is it something that it's much better to replace it proactively? Useful life is another thing. Generationally anymore with technology, we've seen things change so rapidly, technology, that, you could actually find efficiencies by replacing something. Today, the big things that have happened in the last decade or two has been fluorescent lighting, going from, to more efficient fluorescent bulbs, to T6 bulbs, which we didn't even talk about 10 years ago, and now became common practice. To now we're into that whole new generation of LED lighting. It's really real today, and it wasn't that real 10 years ago. So there are times we replace things ahead of their life cycle because the efficiencies are there. And the other thing is too is that you really have to kind of keep in mind, again, operating parameters. One of the classic situations we have in all of our buildings are our transformers. We have primary and secondary transformers in our buildings and outside our buildings, and we forget about those. They just kind of sit there and they just kind of hum away. And we need to make sure that we understand those devices, because as you may understand, these major transformers control large sections and segments of our buildings, and they tend to be forgotten about because they live there for decades. Transformers, theoretically can operate for 50 years, maybe more, but they typically have useful lives of 25, give or take a few years. However, its operating conditions is really the driving force behind whether or not it needs to be replaced earlier or later. If it's running at capacity, if you have a transformer that is being run at its capacity, it certainly is going to generate a lot more heat. It's going to break down that transformer more quickly. If you add to that it's inside of a space that's not conditioned properly or effectively, and it's always hot in the room, that's going to break it down even faster. The type of currents that are running in it might break it down even faster. And next thing you know, you could be facing a major outage to your imaging department because, ahead of its schedule. On the opposite side, very often these transformers are not overloaded. They're minimally loaded, or maybe they're running at 20, 25, 30% in a nice, cool, controlled environment. And they could run for much, much longer beyond, their normal useful life. So these are the kind of things when it comes to doing that 3 to 5 year plan. You need to develop risk assessments. You need to sit there and say, okay, and the better you do that, then you can really start to help communicate and articulate to your administrators and CFOs in advance, a cost and a replacement strategy, for your equipment. It's also really good to, bring in your people from outside the organization when it comes to very, very large, basically building envelope issues and maybe elevators, things like that, very large items, air handlers. Bring in outside organizations and engineering companies to get a baseline. Not only will you get a much better idea of the replacement cycle for that, but you'll also get a great education. You certainly want to be very involved, when they're walking around the building, when they're looking at these elements of your infrastructure, whether it's plumbing or electrical, or maybe it's the parking lot or a canopy, and you really want to be with them, because this is a great way to get to know your building and have inside knowledge that truly you're maybe one of the only people in the whole organization will have it. And you can really sell this to your administration as a way to, mitigate and defer and to have control of your costs, for your building. So I would really encourage you to do that. Sometimes you can do things on your own very easily, for the smaller pieces and parts, but for the bigger things, really truly bring in an outside organization to help inventory and generate criteria, and again, gain knowledge and give you expertise. So these are some of the things when it comes in the very beginning of capital. Really focus on doing that. It doesn't have to be done in a day, but you can work on it and work on it and work on it, and every month, every 6 months, every year, it'll get better and better and better. And within a certain amount of time, you'll have 90x% of your building into a nice plan. And that's just that in and of itself, if it's not already, it doesn't already exist, is something that's extraordinarily valuable for you and for the organization. Now, having said that, one of the other things about capital nuances, and this is very important, I learned this the hard way more than once, and that is be careful what you ask for. You know, there are times where you put these nice plans together and you have these items, and you know you're waiting for the budget, you know, to get some money sent your way, and it just happens that you know money is going to come your way. Then all of a sudden, next thing you know, you need a CT, you need an MR, you know, some other major something's needed. So they defer your list, and it gets pushed back, and it gets pushed back, and then 3 years later, they're like, okay, it's time. Here's your money, and they've even give you a little more. And so now you've taken 3 years of backed up capital, and they give you all that money, and you have all these items, and then you're thinking, oh wow, how am I going to get all this done? Because as you know, and as you will learn, a lot of the items that we deal with when it comes to installing them, replacing them, upgrading them, there's lead time, there's coordination time, there's a lot of communication time, there's planning time, there's shutdown time, you know, and and then the startup time, and you can lose time really, really fast. And this is a big challenge because what happens, unfortunately, especially with capital items, not so much capital projects, but with capital items, and is that you have this window of time to get it done, to close out the book, to not carry over, and you're going to be under pressure at the end of the year to have this stuff done, or you're going to lose the money, and that can really, really, really look bad and can put a lot of pressure on you. You know, another thing that happens a lot when it comes to capital items is that the money starts getting spent at the beginning of the year out of the gate. You may have it be on a fiscal year, you may be on a calendar year, but let's say a calendar year, you're on a January to December year. What I have seen happen is that people will start spending money, if you will, on the front end, and then some big surprise will occur, and it'll eat up all the contingency that was in the capital budget and then some. And then by the time you're into by your June or July, they're announcing to you, due to these urgencies, 90% of the capital budget is gone. And now you have not even gotten started on the majority of what you're about to do, and they're telling you you're going to have to cut back on your projects. I say this for a couple of reasons. One is that you know you do need to plan your work. You need to spread your work out, and you need to really think about getting your capital going earlier in the year than later. If you wait too late into the year, again, you just might lose your ability to even get the money to do your projects. And that's right along with, if you also wait too long, you may not have enough time to get the projects done. So again, be really careful what you ask for. Always develop a timeline of what it takes and the resources. Know that when you get into capital projects, you will be shifting your time and your manpower towards projects, which means you're going to start taking time away from maintenance. And I have experienced and seen and lived where you see such a shift in your manpower to projects that the squeeze on maintenance is so tight, on routine maintenance is so bad, that next thing you know, you start getting a lot of deferred, and you know, overtime goes up, and next thing you're struggling a different way. So these are the kind of things you need to think about when you're doing capital projects and what you're asking for. Again, you got to be careful because you know you got to find out how long you're allowed to run over in the following year with your money to close out projects. Typically, you might get a quarter at most, 3 months after. So, and of course, the other thing that you have to also keep in mind the whole time is other departments, because other departments are going to be spending money too. They're going to be doing capital too, and those capital projects can impact your resources, and you just never know. And you always want to keep an eye on what's going on with these other departments. And if you're not engaged in what's going on with their capital items, then that's a big problem. Lots of times they don't even know the impact of what they're purchasing. They don't understand it might add BTUs to their environment. They may not understand that it may mean an upgrade in electrical. They might not understand that it might actually cause dominoes to occur. In other words, they may start shuffling spaces to make something happen because of a capital item, and next thing you know, you're into 3, 4, 5 moves. One classic example I experienced was we purchased a medical office building, and then we moved people from the main hospital into that medical office building. We moved them out of our hospital. Little did I know when that happened, 2 years later, and who knows, 30, 40 moves later, that stopped. Not just moving the people in the medical office building, but now there was this vacuum of space in our hospital that people wanted to occupy. And that just resulted in, move after move after move for 2 years. And little did I know how much that was going to consume the resources of my department. So when you see this stuff coming and it starts coming at you a little, you understand it for what it is. You're actually able to, talk to your administrators, let them know that, whether you're going to have to contract things out, whether you're going to have to maybe man up some staffing for a little bit, increase overtime. Give them a heads up because, again, they just don't anticipate this and the impact on your department. The other thing is IT is a classic too. IT will buy something, or maybe there'll be some new technology that they'll want to install, whether it's telemetry or related to medical records or phone or communications. And next thing you know, you have people pulling cables and you're dealing with penetrations and ICRAs and everything else. Or for that matter, sometimes in some places there's not good communication between the departments, and they're doing the project and you do not even know about it. So again, all that to say, be very, very aware of what's going on with other departments with their capital. Now, you may have a place that keeps you very much involved with it, but again, at the exact same time, you may not have a place that keeps you, involved with what's going on. It's also important that when it comes to capital items, that you really need to manage disposition and acquisition. And you got to think about that very, very early on. When it comes to disposition and acquisition, disposition is one of those funky words, and it means a lot. In other words, when you dispose or get rid of an item, or you move an item out of service, a lot of things can happen. Number one is whenever you purchase it on the front end, acquire it, they expect you to track that thing to death. From life to death, and you will get a list of all the inventory that building is that organization is accounting for, and you need to know where it is. And so you have to really be able to have a nice list that says, okay, this piece of equipment was sold, or this piece of equipment is in storage, or this piece of equipment was given away, or this piece of equipment was thrown away. And that tracking of a piece of equipment out of the building can be very, very, very tricky. Probably one of the most difficulties I've had with that is you'll have departments that will not let go of a capital item when they get new equipment because they want to keep it as a backup. I can tell you right now, just from the get-go, this is generally a bad idea. And there's lots of reasons why it's a bad idea. One reason is it eats up your storage. Number two is rarely can you put this stuff into a conditioned space, and most times this equipment needs conditioned space. The third reason is kind of related to the space is that critters will get inside of it, bugs or mice or whatever, and they'll build nests inside these things, and that just creates other kind of issues. Another issue is competencies. Lots of time this old equipment, the staff are trained on the new equipment. They're not trained on the old equipment, and you'd be surprised how quickly they lose their competencies on the old equipment. There's also issues with that equipment not being regularly maintained. So it's a really difficult situation when the departments who've had this piece of equipment for 5-10 years and they like it, but they're getting new equipment and they want to hold on to it. I cannot stress strongly enough generally what a bad idea that is. Now, I can see maybe holding it for a small period of time, 90 days or something while they transition to the new equipment. But beyond that, it really just needs to go away. One of the blessings in disguises that I've had is I had storage space taken away from me at one point because they were, I can't remember recall why. I think laundry was expanding or something was expanding, and we moaned and complained, and it was difficult. We had to clean out and get rid of and all this kind of stuff. But ironically, the blessing in disguise was we couldn't keep hardly anything anymore, and it really, really, really helped to mitigate the problems of people trying to keep stuff because we just didn't have space to store stuff. And so it sounds funny, but it was actually very, very helpful in the long run. One other thing we started doing too is that whenever we would put stuff in storage and we were forced to do it, we would actually cut the cord. We would take the power cord off it, or we would cut the cord, because we did not want something coming back into that building without it going through a re-inventory or a reacquisition process. We really, really needed to do that. It also allowed us more control over things when we had to remove them from that, like I said, that asset list that I talked about. I talked about the disposition here, but I also want to talk about acquisition. And this is not really long, but when you acquire an item, you really need to get as much information as possible on that item when you put it in the inventory. Some of the information that we generally don't get consistently comes from materials management. You really want to know what was the purchase price. You really want to know what was the original purchase order. You want to know what warranties, what guarantees, what contracts came with that. Lots of times, people will purchase things not directly from the manufacturer, but they'll purchase it from an intermediary, and it's kind of confusing on who's really taking care of that item. Again, you want to know what the contract costs are and who the contract contacts are and things like that. It just really helps to have all the information on the front end when you're loading up your system, whether it comes to getting parts or whether it comes to getting service or whether it comes to maintaining warranty. It's very handy to have that, and you really want to get that again on the front end. You want to get the acquisition date again, so you can start the clock on that stuff, and how old it is, because this will come up later. This is a lot of the stuff that will come up later, and otherwise you got to chase it down later, and chasing it later is often much more difficult, if not impossible. So that's kind of the disposition acquisition piece, and I really hope you go back and listen to this again or remember this, because this will come up. This will be part of your life as a facilities person. I had another related story, and it kind of goes back to what I was talking about when we got that medical office building or business office building. One of the things that happened was that building, when we purchased it, they had a ton of modular furniture, and that was a nightmare. The modular furniture, it's really nice, and the stuff that we had gotten in the purchase was really nice, but unfortunately, it doesn't work really well when you put it into single offices. A lot of the modular furniture we had was cubicles that was really designed for a big open area where you could have lots of people, no walls. But the hospital, we got hold of it, and the administrators were excited, and they thought, well, a lot of people can update their furniture. And those of you who've worked in this industry are probably already moaning and understanding what I'm about to say, and that is, next thing you know, you're installing modular furniture into these offices. You're covering up wall plates. You're covering up outlets. It's really difficult to fit and configure inside of an 8x10 office space. It's just lots of issues, and that really contributed to just a lot of headaches. The maintenance staff, while they got good at putting it up and taking it down, they really couldn't understand, if you will, the lack of I don't want to say common sense, but it really wasn't designed for that. And so we made it work. We made it fit. When we were done, good news, bad news was it looked great, and the staff loved it, but the amount of time and energy, and really wasn't even designed for that kind of environment. And so it was kind of a mixed bag for us as far as having to go through that whole process. And that again happened throughout that 2 years I talked about earlier. Not only that, but whenever you, of course, take out a desk and you start to put modular furniture, very often people are now saying, hey, maybe we need a new floor, maybe I need this place painted now, and just all kinds of other stuff comes along. You just never ever seem like you can anticipate how many hours you're going to end up spending when something like that happens. So you got to keep an eye on it, and hopefully, like I said, this conversation helps you, go into that a little more eyes wide open if you happen to have a similar experience. Um, the other thing, and this is the last that I wanted to cover for this nuances, is differentiating between a capital project, a capital item, and a consumable. And we'll cover this again in another course, but and I know we touched on it as well in this course, but it's very important that you do that. Again, you are managing a very large budget, and typically you need to know really what type of budget it is and what are the rules of your organization as it pertains to that budget. A capital item seems pretty simple. It's much more specific. It is typically a singular type purchase, or it could be a multiple of singular type purchases. You could be buying 10 of an item that are similar, and that would be considered capital items. And they cost more than a certain amount of money. They last for a certain number of years. So those are kind of the simple definition of a capital item. It's a specific item. It lasts for a certain number of years, and it exceeds a certain dollar amount, so you can depreciate it, and that's really what they're trying to look at. The capital project, again, they tend to be fairly simple. A capital project is typically something that has construction related to it. You're going to be modifying, renovating, designing, upgrading a space, and you're going to be incorporating something into that space. And ironically, you could have capital items going into a capital project. So you may do a renovation, which is part of the capital project, and it might last 2 years. But you're going to put those capital items into that space, into that project. And they're typically not managed on the same budget all the time. Occasionally they are within the same project overall, but they may be handled very, very separately. And you got to keep that in mind. Where it gets a little tricky for us, it comes to contingency money. Most capital projects, and even typical capital projects, have contingency. Depending upon the scope, scale, and complexity of the project, they'll add 3%, 5%, 10% contingency money. So let's say, for example, you have $1 million project and 10% contingency. So you have a $1 million project and you have $110,000 in contingency. So that's just for things that might happen. And what will happen is, as you get to the end of that project, if you haven't used that contingency money, there's a tendency to try to figure out how to spend it. And in some cases, that's not a problem because it's budgeted, and administration will give you the green light to go and do that. In other cases, it's better to return that money and not spend it. Where it gets tricky is in two fronts. One is when you want to build a relationship with the people you work with, but you have to be careful when it comes to there's some ethic issues here, and it comes down to is where you can probably purchase some additional items that fit into the project and it makes sense, but then at the exact same time there are tendencies to want to purchase capital items inside of the capital project. And that's a line that you got to be very careful to cross, because the way the fiscal responsibilities and the way that there are rules and regulations and guidelines on how you can spend money, and you can't mix them. And it's hard. And again, if you don't understand the difference between a capital project and capital item, and certainly very often the department managers do not, because they do one project every so often, you're kind of the person in the middle there that's managing the money. And then it gets even a little more complex because of consumables. Consumables are items that don't last but so long. I mean, they're meant to be done one and done, or used for a very short period of time, and then you throw them away. A good example would be ultrasound probes are typically consumables, but they can be capitalized, but they're often consumables because they only last a couple of years. Or a much easier one would be filters. Filters are a consumable item, a filter for, let's say, an air handler or something. Those items are operational. They cannot be mixed into the capital purchase unless they come with the original purchase of the equipment. It's just part of it. But very often it's a little confusing on what is a consumable, and consumables really need to come out of operating budgets of departments. And this is where there's an extra challenge because everyone's trying to manage a budget. Everyone wants to, meet their expectations of their budgets, and there can be this, temptation to use a capital project to absorb consumable items to help your budget. Now, there are rare circumstances where it all can be done, but by and large, most of the times it cannot and it should not. And it can be, again, it puts you in kind of a challenging position when it comes to working with your peers because, there's always that relationship factor, and you want to make sure that you maintain a good relationship. But again, the sooner you understand this, the better you understand this, the better you're able to articulate this, the better it's going to make you an effective professional when it comes to managing, capital projects, items, and consumables. So I hope this helped. Again, some of this will be on the test, so I hope you took a few notes. Again, I hope this did help you, and you look back and say, hey, Mike was right, or Mike was wrong. But if I'm wrong, please let me know. I'm always wanting to improve, and I do appreciate your feedback. And that's it for Capital Budget Nuances, 3 decades of buying big stuff.